Good afternoon, Patricia. Here we are in Louisville Convent in Woodland Hills, California, and we have the great opportunity to talk with you about some of the ministries that you have been involved with here in the California region for many, many years. So we want to welcome you, and we're so happy to have the opportunity to hear from you about your life and ministry. Our focus today is to get an understanding of your involvement with the Louis League in Corpus Christi Parish in Pacific Palisades, California. So if you would like to just begin talking about that, and I'll maybe ask you some questions as we move along. So a little bit of sharing about that precious Louis League.
I have the privilege of being the coordinator of the St. Louis League. This was put in place way back in 1962. The principal of the grade school, of which I was principal for 22 years, and I inherited the St. Louis League from the prior principal. It is composed of 20 to 24 people from our parish, mainly from our school setting. This group was formed in 1962 to help the sisters to get a television for the sisters, to get a vacation for the sisters, and to think of them and provide for them in their retirement, because we did not have, the Sisters of St. Louis in California did not have the promise of retirement. So I'm involved as the coordinator. Sister Judy Dieterle is the liaison from the administration. I work with them closely. It's important that they are validated and encouraged. We have a monthly meeting, and prior to the monthly meeting, the chairs both meet with me and we discuss the agenda. They have 3 major fundraising events in the year, one being the St. Louis League wreath making, and this year we made 300 wreaths for sale. Then we also have the fashion show and the luncheon and fashion show. And then we have the membership drive. There's a membership drive from which we derive a significant amount of money in the neighborhood of 40,000 to 50,000. Over the years, the donation from this group has really grown. I've only been involved with it for 32 years.
Only for 32 years.
Prior to that,
yeah.
It's important that Sister Celine Lydon, Lord rest her, she worked very hard, and she passed this on to me as she passed it on to Sister Maureen O'Connor, Lord rest her also, and then to me. I feel it's a privilege to work in this capacity with very generous people.
Patricia, could you talk a little bit about the wreaths that they make every year? I know I was in the regional office the day you arrived with these beautiful wreaths and the gifts that you do and make with for the sisters.
Yes, this group was consistently anxious to start another project, and it was during my time, during my 30 years with the Louis League, that one of our mothers, called Joyce Cluse, whose children were at our school, she recommended that we have a wreath, a Christmas wreath, and it would be a fundraiser. At that point, it was sold for $50 per wreath. We just sold them this year, in 2016, for $75. 50% of that goes back to the community. The group of 22 met in the gymnasium at Corpus Christi in Pacific Palisades on a Tuesday morning and decorated these wreaths. There were 2 people responsible for securing all of the materials for it. The wreath itself, that came, as a matter of fact, from San Francisco, and then the ribbon and the ribbon cutting and all the decor that went on it. It was a real experience. They were so dedicated, and I was a part of that. I did help out in the distance.
They're beautiful. They're hanging on the front door of the convent here in Woodland Hills, California, Louisville, and also here in the ranch house in the building where we're filming.
And they're hanging it all around all the families in the Huntington Palisades and around the Palisades. There's 300 of them.
Wow,
So,
you made 300.
yes, and some people donated the ones that Louisville got and that are hanging on our front door at Corpus Christi and Pacific Palisades.
They are so generous and they have been so good to us over the years, and we thank you for your involvement with them. You've been here at Palisades for 32 years in an elementary school, and your educational background is quite rich and varied, and you've done a number of ministries in your time here in California. So Patricia, would you like to address maybe from the very beginning and do a little history and tell us the story of some of the places you've been? One is very dear to my heart, the parish where I grew up in, so I hope that gets in the story.
Right. Well, I was told on the 23rd of May, 1955, that I was privileged to be chosen for the first American novitiate and also to be involved in the school, in the education. And as I sit here today, I can honestly say I feel privileged to have been chosen. I've worked with such different, diverse groups of people, and I have found all our American people in the Catholic Church so wonderful and so affirming and so kind to us. They were most sensitive to our needs and kind to us. I first started as Our Lady of Refuge in Long Beach, where I accompanied our first novice through her postulancy and half of her senior or junior white year. Then in October, 3 years later, I was assigned to teach middle school at St. Mel's in Woodland Hills. And there I taught 2 sessions every day for 3 years.
How many students were in your class?
65 students in each, so it's twice 65. And I lived at Louisville for a few months, and then I was assigned to St. Mel's Convent in January of 1960. I taught there until 1966 on the middle school. And then I was appointed principal of St. Mel's School, taking Sister Dorothy, Lord rest her, Dorothy Doherty's place. And then I taught half days until 1970.
What did you teach, Patricia, in those days?
I taught English and social studies. My major was in English and social studies.
As well as being principal?
As well as being principal, yes. And that many children.
And were they still 2 sessions at that point? Or was it...
The sessions stopped after 3 years.
Okay, so but the classes were still large, weren't they?
Very large. We had a total of 999 children at one point in the school because another parish was not formed, and we were directed to take in their children. So
was it a double grade school at that point?
Triple grades on the middle school, but on the lower we didn't take the lower grades.
So you were an administrator for years. Talk a little bit about you have a varied background. You have a degree in, I probably won't get it right, but special education. You worked with disabled
yes.
students.
Well, I was trained by the famous Dr. Mariana Frostig, who was a Swiss citizen, and she came to the United States, and she was very concerned about children who had difficulty learning. And I attended a number of her workshops over the years. And then finally, in 1980, the congregation very kindly gave me the liberty to train under Mariana Frostig. She was so wonderful. All areas, in the area of dyslexia, in the area of visual and auditory processing. And I instructed children, and of course she had no patience with anybody who was over 12 years old, so she got quite impatient with all of us, but she was a wonderful human being. And I learned a lot from her. I learned a lot from her prior even to my being in her program. She ran a center called the Frostig Center in Pasadena, and I attended that for a year and got my degree. And it had a counseling component to it also. because it was very important that as a credentialed and as a person who had a master's, it was important that I could relate to the parents and that I could understand the children. And then since I had been in administration, I realized that was important also for the teachers to be able to help them indicate who was having problems and who was not and what was the problem. So I was very graced to have that opportunity.
What are some of the highlights when you look back all of the time that you have spent in education, either as a teacher, as an administrator, as working with students who have different learning ways of learning? Like, what are some of the highlights or the stories that you could share about that?
I believe I'm a teacher at heart. I loved teaching, even when I was pretty busy at Corpus Christi in Pacific Palisades. I always taught a religion class. I felt it was very important to get to know the children, and then through them you get to know the families and you understand. So teaching really was my bag, so to speak. It was the thing I enjoyed most. I also have to agree, I did feel challenged by being a principal. However, I found people very gracious and very kind and very supportive, both at St. Mel's and at Pacific Palisades. So those were the real highlights of my time. And of course, the major highlight really was my training for the learning handicapped, because I always feel and I believe and I know that many of these children are very bright kids and they have some type of learning disability, so to speak, as Marianne Frostick called it, the learning disabled. And if you can break that cycle and you can get in and really teach to that child and take a personal interest in they can work miracles. Some of my past pupils have gone on even to medical school and have gone on to all types of challenging jobs. And I also worked with autistic children, and they were a real challenge because they were seriously autistic. But I did see growth and development, and I guess I learned that if you persevere and you believe in a child and the parents are cooperative, then you can work miracles. And some miracles did happen, and some were successful, and some were not successful.
I imagine that you have some characters or students' faces that come to mind when you talk about them. And I'm going to also imagine from what you've just said that students have come back to thank you and to share with you their stories now.
A lot of students, yeah. Many times, especially at Christmas time and summer vacation time, they come back. And of course, I meet them around all the time. As a matter of fact, I met two just yesterday in the drugstore. And we had a long chat. And it was, I felt the Lord was in it because one of them had lost his brother just a year ago and he wanted to talk with me about it. So situations like that make me feel good and make me feel very positive.
And I know now, too, in addition to your work with the Louis League in Palisades, you also have a very special ministry with the sick in the parish, don't you?
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about that and how you got involved in that one?
Well, I suppose I got involved in it because the pastor did not want me to move from Palisades. That was the reason. And he asked me, we had a need, and he asked me to look around and see what was the greatest need in the Palisades, in Corpus Christi Parish. And while, because of my background and because of my loss of my own sister, it brought all that back to me, and my parents at an early age, it wasn't being my favorite thing that I would choose to do, but I felt called to it because we had a number in excess of 30 people who were ill and homebound, and many of these people had been staunch Catholics, almost the backbone of our parish, and I felt called then to help them. And I organized a group. I have 25 people, 25 ministers, and I meet with them bi-monthly for prayer, and I keep constant contact with them on computer and also on the telephone and so on. I myself minister to them. I have 4 people I bring communion to at different times, and we all help one another. And it's a very special group because there are people who were parents when I first went to Corpus Christi, and now their children are grown and they wanted some ministry to help. So a number of them are nurses, a number of them have worked in different professions, and they are just wonderful people. So it is a very special privilege, and looking at it now from my initial being asked to look around, I'm glad I said ministry to the sick and homebound.
I'm sure they're more than glad that you visit and that you listen and that you share with them. I'm going to go circle back to the beginning again. Patricia, coming from Ireland, and at that point you were pretty young.
I wasn't 21 that time.
Okay. What were some of the impressions that you had about coming to California? I know I've heard some funny stories from the sisters, just in terms of language differences.
Yeah.
Could you share some of those early experiences?
Well, when I was first told I was privileged to be chosen, I really was excited. I suppose I was excited in that my father, Lord rest him, always loved the American people, and he always said, you can be anything you want in America. And that really stayed with me. And he always did our lessons and so on with us and showed us where America was on the map and so on. So I always had a keen interest in America. And it was really encouraged, I guess, as a child, as a young child, prior to being 14 years old. I imagine even if I never had become a sister, I'd probably end up in America. So I had a great love for it. And when I came first, I arrived on the 5th of September, 1955. And on the 8th of September, 1955, I was in a classroom confronted with 55, there were only 55, which was wonderful, 55 students.
What grade level?
On a 4th grade level. And I did not know a dime from a dollar, from a quarter. I hadn't a notion. And I was supposed to collect the tuition. There was a tuition-based school for the parish. So one of the ladies, and I remember her, Diane Garvey, Lord rest her, she since has passed away, I will never forget it. And our language was different, different meanings for different. And I still have an accent, and you never get rid of that, I've discovered in my learning training, but I had really a much worse accent in a way. I mean, never heard of a trash can, a dustbin, that type of thing. Well, I had a real voyage coming over on the plane, and that's you're probably, Margaret, thinking about that. When we first of all left, we called it the gate at Louisville, Monaghan, Convent of St. Louis, Monaghan. And I'd used that gate often in high school. I went 5 years to that school. And I remember going, and we set sail, Antoinette Duffy and myself, with her family, to go to Limerick, to go to the airport. So we stayed overnight, and then we got on our flight to New York. And we arrived in New York. We were greeted by a group of people, including the Rice families, or their relatives. They were wonderful, Mary Rice and Kathleen Rice. And they brought us to lunch. But I was wrapped up in all kinds of clothing. I was told by somebody who had come home, whose name shall be nameless at this point, that I was to bring as much as I could, like a bath towel, and I had that wrapped around me, and I could only take 40 pounds, so I had to wear 2 underskirts. And I also had my green bag, we carried our hose, and I had a number of items in there because I couldn't take them in my case. So I arrived, I couldn't move because I was all wrapped up when I came to New York. So when we came to New York, I was able to disrobe and get the cloak off and all of that. And then we went to have our lunch, and I never saw sandwiches like the sandwiches I saw. I couldn't open my mouth wide enough to eat the sandwiches, so it was all so foreign to me. But I was okay. Then we got on the plane, and the plane was Pan Am, and they were so gracious and so lovely. They were wonderful. And one of the lovely, talented, cute ladies came down to me, hostesses, and she had a beautiful sky blue suit on and a sky blue hat, and she looked just gorgeous. And she said to me, I thought, she said, are you from Belfast? And I said, no, I'm from Dundalk. And then she kept saying, are you from Belfast? And I said, no, I'm from Dundalk. She finally stretched across me and she fastened the seatbelt. I discovered later that she was from the south. She was saying, fasten the seatbelt. And all I heard was Belfast. So anyway, we arrived then in Los Angeles the next day, which was on the 6th of September, 1955, and Sister Miguel was with me, and she had a large, bright-coloured pink blanket, and the temperature that day had been 108. So Miguel's face was the colour of the blanket, and mine was too. And of all places, we were brought to Corpus Christi, to the convent, not really to the convent as such, because it was really a home, a house. And I can still see all the fruit, etc., on the table. I was in real wonderland. It was a real wonderland.
That's quite an interesting story of the flight here. And then I was wondering if you were going to talk about how hot it was, because those August, September months are usually brutally hot. And coming from Ireland.
Well, the following day, Monday the 7th, I had to go to a meeting of all the teachers, and I will never forget the lady she was bringing me to the meeting, and she got me root beer, and I never had heard or seen root beer in my life, and the taste of root. I felt it was some type of toothpaste, but that's what it tasted like. But the temperature that day was 112. So we had all kinds of heavy clothes on us. We were wrapped in a huge, maybe at least 6 yards of pleated habit, serge habit, wool habit. And then of all places, when I left Our Lady of Refuge, when I was assigned to St. Mel's, it was 112. I remember that well, 112 degrees Fahrenheit.
A lot of adjustments.
So it was, but it wasn't that bad. It was just how life was. That's how I felt about it. It was no trauma. I can remember every stage of it. But I liked it. I was happy in it. And the sisters were very kind and good. I was in a wonderful community of 8 people, 7 and myself, and we helped one another, and it was a very positive experience for me. I don't look back on any of it as being terrible or problem, or with the ups and downs of every day, but it was quite enjoyable.
As you look back over these years, Patricia, and as we draw maybe to a conclusion in this interview, what would you identify as the real highlights, maybe 2 or 3, of your experience of your life here in the region, California region, and the many ministries that you have been involved in over those years?
The real highlight would be the privilege of teaching large groups of very wonderful children, both at St. Mel's and at Corpus Christi and Pacific Palisades and at St. Louis of France. I believe St. Louis of France I loved. I felt I was home at St. Louis of France. The people were so gracious and so lovely and so wonderful. But sadly, I had to leave there after 3.5 years because my only sister was very ill and dying. And then she did live for a year, and I stayed on in Ireland, where I taught in the high school that I attended for a year, St. Louis Convent Monaghan. I taught math and English. So I would say the biggest highlight was teaching and working with children who were challenged, who had challenged learning. I always felt that that was very important. I felt I made a difference in the lives of some children. And when they come back and thank us and are successful and have really very reputable jobs, I just makes me feel good. And also the community life I had also was another highlight. Like, we were very supported. I feel getting to know the American Catholics was a very big special for me, because they were very generous, giving people of their time and their talent and of their money. I mean, it was very impressive. Every night, you know, we said prayers. I always said prayers for all those people whose lives touched mine and I touched theirs, that they were so generous to us.
Well,
But I
Patricia,
had never experienced any teaching other than I did in Ireland. All right, I better not put that.
well, I want to thank you for the sharing that you've given us today, for the stories that you've told us, for the wonderful ministries that you have been involved in, especially the wonderful work you have done with the St. Louis League. And because of people like you, we have benefited so greatly from their generosity and their goodness and the leadership that you have offered in the area of education over these many, many, many years. So thank you for sharing your story with us today, Patricia. Thank you very much.
It was a privilege, and thank you very much.